Join us on a journey across the Platte Prairie,
where the land is as
vast as the sky,
and the stories are as rich
as the soil.
Meet Elizabeth and Richard Gross, affectionately known as Betsey and Dick. They live in a historic home built in Prairie School architectural style, a testament to the community's history in the heart of Bismarck. In this episode, hear the story of their whirlwind romance that led to an engagement just 1 week after their first date. Learn about Dick's education at Richardton Abbey in the minor seminary, what it was like for Betsey to meet Dick's German-Russian family, and what they appreciate about each other after more than 50 years of marriage.
Tell me how you guys met.
Well, that was quick. We met at UND. Betsey had just finished her junior year. I had finished my second year in law school. She went out a couple of times with my roommate, and then he went back to Fargo for the summer, and she was staying for summer school. So we dated once, and a week later we were engaged, and 2 months later we were married.
I would like to know more about that first date.
Well, actually, it wasn't all that great. We went to what I recall as Shakey's Pizza Place in East Grand Forks.
Mm-hmm.
And I ordered a pizza, and she obviously came with me.
I was the date, so I was with him.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I just noticed she didn't seem very hungry. I ate my stuff, and she sort of mixed hers around and put her napkin on top of it. And it was only sometime later that I learned she didn't eat cheese. So that was our first date.
Mm-hmm.
And had I known it then, that would probably have just shut everything down.
Mm-hmm. It could have been a deal breaker.
Yeah.
That's been a lifelong thing for you.
It has been a lifelong thing, yes, and he still talks about it as a new thing, yes.
What do you remember about the first date?
I remember the first date being at the pizza place. I do remember when I met Dick, it was at his apartment with his roommate, and I had actually been on a date with the roommate. And when Dick came home that evening, he and I just started talking. We really clicked. It was like magic, and we just kept talking and talking, and somehow my date fizzled out of the picture, and then we ended up getting together shortly after that.
Yeah, her date was not happy.
No.
But he also moved out of town, so
Yeah.
he could have stuck
He was
around.
going back to Fargo.
Right. Not too far.
1 week? So 1 week, what happened next?
What happened next? Well, we spent night and day together, basically, for a week, I should say, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just decided that we'd found true love and we were going to get married. And that was what we set out to do.
That's amazing.
It was pretty amazing. Yes, it was very magical. So we
Go ahead.
really just decided we were going to get married. And of course, I had to tell my parents that I've decided to get married. That did not go over very well.
Did you do this in person?
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm. Were you there?
Well, I was there too.
Yes, we were
Yeah.
both there. We drove to Fargo,
Were you
sat out in the
nervous?
backyard with my mother and father at the picnic
Sort
table.
of nervous, yes.
And they were very gobsmacked by this news. And rather than asking questions about maybe why we wanted to do this or what was going on, they basically said, we forbid you to get married. You can't do this.
How old were you, Betsey?
I was 20.
And I was 24.
I understand now, looking back as a more mature adult, that news would be shocking to any parent.
Mm-hmm.
But the response was that you can't do this. And then Dick specifically said, well, when could we do this?
Well, but it started with, we were planning on getting married in September before school started.
Yes.
We weren't going to get married right away. Thought we'd
We had a
wait
few
the
months.
summer.
Mhm, right.
And then they were not happy about that. And then I said, well, how about December? And her father said, absolutely not. And I said, well, when then? Next year in September. And we were both, we'll have graduated by then, didn't know where we would be. We were comfortable at the Newman Center, so we just went ahead without them. Literally without them. They didn't attend.
Did your parents?
Yes.
They
How?
were actually very supportive, I think,
Yes.
as your parents.
Yes.
And I'm sure they wondered what we were doing, but they were very supportive and at the same time and realized that it was our decision to make, and they stood by us. I think going back and reflecting on that conversation on the picnic table with my father, one of the comments he made to me and to Dick was, "You don't want an albatross around your neck," meaning me. Yes, and those
Your dad?
words, my
Your
dad
dad said
said
that?
that to Dick. Why do you want an albatross around your neck? And it was, I think that really was a catalyst for me being more determined than ever that, well, then I guess I really am going to do what my heart is calling me to do, and that is to be with the man that I love.
So, what was the date of your engagement?
May 27th,
When did you get
my
married?
birthday.
Oh,
Isn't that so sweet?
how
We got
much
married
time passed then?
July 23rd.
Okay,
So we'll have been married 52 years in
this
July.
summer.
Right, so sometimes these things do work out.
Sometimes.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
And
You're new.
our wedding was very small at the Newman Center. His family, his parents were there. And then my sister, who was in Fargo for the summer, living at my parents' home, she's 2 years younger than I am, she hitchhiked to Grand Forks so that she could be at the wedding. She packed her dress in a little duffel bag and went out on the highway and put her thumb out, and
How old was she?
she would have been 2 years younger than I was. So
Okay.
she was
18.
Was that a big deal to you at the time? Do you remember hearing that and being like, oh gosh, you shouldn't do that, or it wasn't really a thing?
You know, hitchhiking wasn't that unusual for people at that time, especially from Fargo to Grand Forks, but it was important to me that she was there and made the effort to be there, and I really was impressed that she would actually do that.
Made it happen.
Yes, she did, because I didn't encourage her to hitchhike to come, but she was sneaking out of the house.
Oh.
So she had to sneak out of the house. Nobody could know where she was going. And then she told me that my dad was sitting on the couch in the living room with his
When-
head in his hands. So that was how she left the house that day.
Wow.
I know.
Where were your parents living when you went to tell
Napoleon.
them? Okay. So that was the next stop after the
Well,
meeting
I
with-
think I had already called
Okay.
home, talked to Mom and Dad, and they were fine with it. And when we set the date, they said they would come. So they drove from Napoleon to Grand Forks.
Long trip.
Yeah.
Yes, we had a little, late morning ceremony. And then my best friend from Fargo, and I had roomed with her for my 3 years in college, she was there for my maid of honor. And the night before, she said, well, what about flowers? I said, well, I don't know. I mean, we had no money, really, for anything. And so we decided we need flowers for this wedding. So we proceeded to go to the park that was right on campus. And there were beautiful flowers, spring with summer flowers that were in bloom, and we started cutting away.
Just waiting for us.
In the dark of night, sneaking the flowers out of the park, and then went back to an apartment we were staying at and got them ready for bouquets and boutonnieres.
Very resourceful.
Yes,
So where did you live after you got married? What was happening then? You had a year of school left.
yes. And Dick had a year of
We
undergrad.
lived
or
in
year
a
last year.
tiny basement apartment. Cost $99 a month. And she worked and I worked besides going to school. For a while we were on food stamps, but we made it through the year. And then I was hired shortly before the end of my senior year. And it was here in Bismarck, and Betsey agreed that would be a nice beginning at least. And so we came here. She got a teaching job. I got a legal job, and we made like 10 times more money the first year than we had that whole,
Right.
I mean, our first year out, than we had that whole first year.
We now had a 2-bedroom apartment, a great big kitchen, a dining room.
So you've been in Bismarck ever since. Yes. Yeah. So
Since
51
1972.
years or something.
Right.
You live in a very historic house in Bismarck.
We do.
How long have you lived there?
44 years this year.
Okay.
I was actually teaching at St. Mary's High School, and one of the home ec teacher at that time was doing a tour of homes with her students. And one day came into the faculty lounge and said, I need another chaperone for this tour that we're going on. And she explained where she was going, and I said, I'm in. I would love to be a chaperone. I love the historic district. I want to see those homes. So my job was to get a sub then for my classes, my English classes, and then I would take care of the group one of the groups that would come through the homes. So we went to our house, what is now our house. I toured the home with these students, and the owner whose husband had passed away a number of years ago. She knew that she was going to be relocating, and she just casually said, my house is for sale. So there was no sign. It was just a kind of word of mouth thing. And I was very interested then. My ears really perked up to that because I love the house. It's a Prairie School home, and she knew a lot about the history of the house and really just how they contracted to get this house built in Bismarck in 1912. So I came home and called Dick from home and said, we have got to buy this house. I love this house. You have to see this house. It is just amazing. Because we had always said we wanted to live in the historic district.
Right.
And we weren't sure if we could afford a house there. We weren't sure what we could manage, what was coming available. But I said, this house really is incredible.
We eventually paid $100,000 for the house
Wow.
44 years ago. It was a lot. It had been built or designed by a firm out of St. Paul, Minneapolis, St. Paul, by the name of Purcell and Elmsley. And they were nationwide recognized as Prairie School architects. One of them had worked with Frank Lloyd Wright in Chicago before he moved then to Minneapolis. And so he had the direct Prairie School connections there. During that phase of his work life, Frank Lloyd Wright was one of the initiators of that school of architecture. So, and it was in such good shape.
It was.
Just one family, the father, who had built it in 1912, and then when he passed away, his son and family were in it, and then when his son passed away, his widow sold it to us. So we're
Wow.
basically the only second family
Right.
who's lived in the house in the 112 years that it's been around.
And one of the key elements of Prairie School architecture is that it is one with the prairie, that it's horizontal lines, that it is really embracing just nature in its colors and its movement. And so when you look at our home, it's very horizontal, and it is very nature focused in terms of the wood colors, the tile colors, those kinds of things. There's porches. But I think those are probably the key things of Prairie School architecture that would stand out.
Those in particular, what you see on the outside. And the inside, rooms flow from one into another. There's only one short hallway coming into the house in the back. Otherwise, there are no hallways. It's open space. It was long before other architects got into that notion. I think it's more of come back now in modern architecture, but it was really unique for its time. And it was really in opposition to the prior schools of architecture that had gone on before, which were far more, the Victorian period in particular, far more ornate,
Right.
with a lot of stuff in them. And this is very simply made, not ornate. And as Betsy said, to blend in with the nature around it.
And I think people would recognize mission style. And so really Prairie School is really infused with mission style in terms of the furniture, the woodwork. It's very mission-like, and it is very simplistic in the lines.
Right.
So you mentioned your family. Do you have many siblings?
I have there are four of us.
Okay.
My parents had 6 children, but 2 passed away. I do want to say something about my parents that is so unique. I tell a lot of people. My parents each grew up on farms near Napoleon. My mother's family were Cambites, grew up on a farm 6 miles south, and my father's family were Grosses, and they had a farm 11 miles south. Each family had 10 kids. And it ended up that 4 of the kids from each family married 4 of the kids from the other family. And so we have double cousins, Cambites and Grosses, all over the place. And I love to tell that story because no one's been able to match that. I've heard people say, oh, I know like somebody, 2 couples from 2 families. I said, but how about 4?
Yeah.
And I'd never heard the concept of double cousins before. So that was just part of the initiation into the family, is double cousins is just a natural part of that whole family.
So where did your grandparents come from?
Both were Germans from Russia and came from South Russia. The story, I'm sure you're aware, of the Germans from Russia is that they were invited the German farmers were invited to South Russia by the Tsarina at that time, Catherine. And she wanted them to come to teach the Russian peasants how to farm. And in return, would give them free land and freedom for religion, and indicated that they wouldn't have to serve in the Russian army, freedom from taxation. Those things were all part of the deal. And for about 70, 80 years, it worked pretty well, from the early 1800s till later, and especially around the time of the Russo-Japanese War at the beginning of the 20th century. And one of my grandparents actually served in the Russian army. The other one was urged to leave, to get out of Russia so he wouldn't have to serve. And the deal had been broken. I mean, they were now requiring the German boys to serve in the Russian army, and they had really stopped them from the freedom of religion that they had enjoyed, and were taxing them, a lot of it, to pay for the war. So I guess the Germans felt that the deal had been broken, and around that time in the U.S. a lot of free land was being offered, and they felt that they could do the same thing that they had started in Russia here on the plains. So it's a long trip for them, but they came and they were tough, and they lived through a lot of tough winters here with very little. But that was the history of both.
What's your background?
My father was Czechoslovakian, and now my daughter, who has done Ancestry.com or one of those, basically Slovakia is now how it's identified in terms of his roots. And his parents spoke Czech, and they were in Minneapolis, which is where I did my early years of growing up. And my grandparents only spoke Czech to my father. And that's so as children, when we would visit, we would sit there in silence, just listening to them talk this language we had no concept of. So that was interesting. And then my mother, we always were told that she was Irish, but we have learned recently that through the same ancestry search and DNA that she's very much of a mix of Irish and English, and I think Scottish and some other qualities thrown in there.
But the one aspect you just referred to is certainly true of my ancestors as well. They came speaking no English.
Yes.
They spoke only
Right.
German Russian, sort of a bastardized German language. And so even though my parents were the youngest of the 10, they only went to school in German in the one-room school. And it was only when they went to high school in Napoleon that they had to learn English. So they all spoke German very well. And then even as we were growing up, and my parents didn't want us to have the German accent, when they were with relatives and were talking about something that they didn't want us to hear, they often spoke in German, so we never really knew what they were talking about. They were good at that.
When I first married Dick and we came to Napoleon for a visit, it was very striking to me that the dialect was brand new to me. I had a very difficult time understanding many of his relatives because they speak really quickly, for one thing.
Oh.
And then it's infused with this dialect that I'd never really heard before. And I was rather stunned and would often look to Dick for interpretation. What was just said to me, I have no idea.
And when she would come, the few times she did come to Napoleon, if my relatives knew that she was there, they'd stop in after church before they went back out to the farms and come in and stare.
Yes.
They were really good at just staring.
Peek through the doorway, we'd be sitting there and they would just look and stare.
So,
Yes.
she looks pretty nice.
You mentioned dialect. Were they using German words?
There's just phrasing is
Well,
different.
yeah, I mean,
and-
the words were dis, that, these, and those.
Sure, so
Those
mix
were-
that in with some
And
other
mix that
things.
in. Yes.
Yeah, and,
Hard to interpret.
Right. And in fact, many Germans can't understand between High German and Low German. And then especially when it's been bastardized by the Russian input, I think they had as much trouble understanding each other as understanding English.
We heard from Dick that he has 3 siblings.
Yes.
How many do
I
you have?
grew up in a family of 7 children, and I'm the second oldest of 7. So there were 5 children, there was a pause, and then my mother had twins, and then there were 7. There's 1 boy in the family, and then 6 of us were girls. So that really definitely impacted the dynamic in the household. It was a very female household, very lively, a lot going on all the time. And we did, in terms of chores, we all had our designated jobs. And so our house, even though there were 7 children, our house was always very orderly, very clean and organized. And we all had jobs that we knew we were responsible for. And when there was a day off from school, that was when we really hit it hard. And we each had the bathrooms, the kitchen, the counters, the closets. There would be something that we would all do. And we generally chose, I don't remember ever arguing about what job we would do. We each had jobs that we didn't mind so much, and we chose to do those.
That sounds awfully agreeable in a
It
house
was quite
with
agreeable.
so
It
many
really
kids.
was. Now, I don't know that my brother had any jobs at all.
Really?
Right.
Where was he
Well,
in
he
the
was
age
young, so
lineup?
he would be number 5.
Okay.
So he was younger.
I had various jobs in college, and the most memorable one is the one that I've told Betsy about. After or during my senior year at Marquette, I worked as an orderly at a large mental hospital, and I was in a ward with 75 very mentally ill people, most of whom were murderers. And the big job we had as orderlies were to keep our back to the wall,
Oh my.
because then they'd tell a story about some orderly didn't, or was sitting in a chair away from the wall, and some patient came behind him and knocked him with a chair or whatever. So we spent a lot of time edging along walls. But it was really a terrible job.
Was the pay good or what's going on
Yeah.
there? Is that what the draw was?
Yes, that's right.
So Marquette, where is this? And was this
Marquette
where you went to law
University,
school?
yeah. Well, no, I did my undergrad at Marquette University in Milwaukee.
Okay.
And I then came back home for law school.
Wow.
I had gone to Assumption Abbey for high school.
In Richardton.
Yes.
Cool.
And because I was going to be a priest.
Oh.
And
Interesting
so
turn
when
of events.
Right.
Yes.
When I was 14, I started there, and it was a boarding school, a long way away, and we didn't have I-94 at that time. I was the most homesick kid you can imagine. A lot of tears, but I only learned much later that when Dad was sent from the farm to go to Napoleon High School his freshman year, he was so homesick that his dad let him come back to the farm for a year, and he only went back to high school the next year. But so there's something genetic in it, or something familial, whatever. But I was very, very homesick, and in many ways it was a good learning experience. We had some good teachers, but a lot of the social, cultural aspects were pretty weak. And we'd be in a dorm with 60 other guys and Army surplus cots or beds.
Was that school only for students who are interested in?
No,
Becoming
but we always said it was either, you were either there to go to the seminary, or it was there, or go to the boys' school for wayward youth.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
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 What was your first job?
Well, you know, my job as a young person in Fargo was babysitting all the time and as the second oldest of 7, there was a lot of babysitting just in my own immediate family, and then of course the neighborhood. So, and my youngest sisters, who are the twins, I was in the summer before 8th grade when they were born. And so they were really just my heart and soul for those several years. I loved taking care of them, and I loved really being their primary babysitter when needed. So that relationship has been really strong since the very beginning, even though we are many years apart in our age. But then after that, I'd say that in Fargo, I worked at Fargo Theater, selling movie tickets and making popcorn.
Cool.
And that was a great job. Got to see movies for free. Got to have a little social life because you saw lots of people coming in, and had as much buttered popcorn as you could possibly want. So that was a really great job. Then I also worked at Fargo Rubber Stamp, which was really just a warehouse where these very antiquated machines were set up, and basically you pumped out buttons that people would sell for various events. So that was one of the things. It was not an air-conditioned place. It was on the top floor of some old building right by the Pink Pussycat, if you're familiar with that, in downtown Fargo. So whenever I read a Louise Erdrich book that talks, and she kind of zeroes in on that area, I said, I know where I was. That was exactly where it was. And then following that, I worked at Cox Bakery. And I did that really through a couple of years of high school, and then a couple summers. And my oldest sister worked there with me one summer also. And so that was great too, because glazed donuts every day. I was very happy about that. So somehow I managed to stay a 95-pound little fragile thing, but I was eating donuts almost every day.
That's not
I
fair.
don't know how that happened. No, I really don't.
What did you do at that job?
I didn't bake. I actually just sold. So I sold and packaged things for people, and then took breaks and had donuts, and then went back out and sold some more.
How about the stamp place? Did you run a machine?
Yes.
You were literally making the buttons.
Literally making the buttons, very primitive buttons. And really, I do remember burning myself really badly because the button machine jammed at one point, and I grabbed hold of it. Well, it's run by steam, and so I just had the sizzle on my hand, and I did not go home, though, that day. They said I could go home, and no, I can tough this out. I don't know why.
How old were you?
I would have been just 16 at that time.
Oh my gosh. Going back to the Richardton School story, how long were you there?
4 years. At that time, it was called a minor seminary. And so it was definitely prepped to go to a major seminary. But by my junior year, by the end of my junior year, I was sure I was not going to go into the priesthood, but I wanted to finish it. So I completed I wasn't nearly as homesick going into my senior year. But I don't know if irony is the right word, but ironically, the two colleges that I picked that I wanted to go to were either Notre Dame or Marquette, both Catholic schools. And one of the primary reasons I decided to go to Marquette is because they had girls. And at that time, Notre Dame just was an all-boys school. It later allowed women to come. But at that,
How big was your class when you graduated?
49, with the largest class they ever had.
How often did you get to go home?
Just for the holidays, and sometimes not for those, but it would be Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter.
Wow.
It was such a long way, and vehicles weren't in all that great a shape. And people were working. But there were several of us from Napoleon, so they could split up. The parents could have
Do the driving.
different turns
Right.
at coming and picking us up.
I would like to hear from you two how you think you are alike and how you think you're different.
I'll let you lead the way.
Oh, sure. Well, Betsy has had to be far more patient than I. She has a lot more things to be patient about in me. Our backgrounds are very similar in that we both went to Catholic grade school and high school. So in that way, our religious background was pretty much the same. And education was pretty similar
Right.
too, other than my going on to law school. We both had a college education. So I don't know, she's far more beautiful than I am.
Oh, that's so sweet of you, darling.
And she's been a great mother to our children. And I was, especially as they were growing, I was on the road a lot. Especially during that, I spent 8 years as legal counsel for Governor Sinner, and that was as they were growing.
Right, it was a job of a lifetime for him, and he loved doing it. And I was in our home, I loved that, had a job that I really enjoyed. And really, our children were really easy children to raise in so many ways. And we had just, I think, one of the sort of the precedents that I sent when Dick was doing all that traveling was he would call every night. And I don't think there's a night that you miss calling. It was very, very rare. And it would always end the conversation with, I love you, and say that to me and the kids. So that was really a constant thread that was woven through all those conversations. And I do remember with the children always just making very light of the fact that, oh, Dad's out of town for a few days, and Dad'll be back this weekend. And never really phrasing it like, oh, he's gone again, you know. So it was just sort of, oh, that's what it is, and he'll be back in this. And so it was always very light, and I think very upbeat about that. And I think that just helped everybody just understand that this was our routine, that was the rhythm of the family, and we all really just embraced that, I guess. I think one thing that I was thinking as you were talking about the backgrounds that we share, the similarities, and so it was the Catholic upbringing was pretty significant for both of us for different reasons, but essentially the whole idea of that was a big part of growing up in our families. That was an important aspect of that. And then I think we both really had shared values as far as education. You know, we both, there was not a doubt in my mind that I would go to college and I would get a degree, at least one degree, and we would move forward in that way. And then just sort of the whole, what, I hate to use the term family values, but the things that we really valued, and we both knew that we wanted a family, that we wanted to create a life together. So all of those things we sort of discovered during that 1 week of intense being with each other, that we had so many things in common, and way more things in common than not, I think, more than ever. But I think Dick is much more of a worrier than I am. I think I worry less anxiety about things, and I'm not sure if that's because I don't have a chance to be the warrior in the family. It is a matter, because when one is, you just sort of take another path, perhaps. I'm not sure. I think I like to do things in a really creative way, and I think, you know, the artsy things are really important to me, and Dick always values that.
Even as a cook. Her presentation is always great.
yes.
I'm really bad at that. So, yeah, I have very little artistic or music background in me, and she's got great artistic background, so that is really a difference between us.
Thank you, dear. It's nice of you. But you're a really good financial planner for us. So, we have a balance. So there are a
That's
lot of things that
important.
he does that are more black and white,
Mm-hmm.
and there are things that I do that are sometimes I think of them as really the bonus ideas, the bonus items in our family. But I think we both complement each other and have always managed to do that without rigidly setting down rules or expectations that this part is your job, this part is my job. But we just sort of moved into it and it worked.
What's your favorite thing that Betsy cooks?
Indian. She does a wide variety of Indian dishes, and they're always really, really great. And she usually makes enough for several days.
Yes.
So we have it.
Bonus.
Yeah, that's
Right.
bonus. Well, and then I have to give our daughter credit for that because while she was living in New York City, she was exposed to Indian cuisine and then came home and she really taught me the very preliminary steps in Indian cooking. So, and shared spices with me and things I'd never heard of, and that just opened up a whole new door, a whole new pathway to cooking, rather than the North Dakota cooking style that we grew up in, which was roast beef and mashed potatoes and gravy.